MultiAsian.Church, Chapter 8. Why Multi-Asian Churches? The typical Asian American church will bring together people from two ends of the cultural spectrum, from the East and the West. When an Asian American church starts by reaching first-generation immigrants from Asia, naturally over the course of time, immigrant parents would have children who are raised in America. When East meets West. For people acculturated with an Eastern perspective, first-generation Asians are accustomed to a high context with values and traditions, family, filial piety, respect for authority, harmony, honor, protocol, social status, loyalty, and being group-oriented. For people acculturated in a Western society, next-generation Asian Americans are socialized in a low-context culture with values in individualism, directness, assertiveness, casual informality, egalitarian, mobility, and results-oriented. This broad overview is only intended to contrast some of the cultural differences and not to be used as a guide for cultural competency. Bringing people together with these widely divergent cultural differences can be particularly challenging. Misunderstandings and conflicts can easily arise. Additionally, these conflicts can disrupt the social order of generational and familial relationships, which become intensely painful and shameful. For example, what a next-generation Asian American intends as an honest inquiry or question for clarification may be perceived by a first-generation Asian American as disrespect for questioning authority. Allow me to share a personal experience. When I graduated from Dallas Theological Seminary and went into full-time pastoral ministry at a traditional ethnic Chinese church, I thought my seminary training could be applied right away. I was thoroughly mistaken. I was completely clueless to the cultural context of the traditional ethnic Chinese church, even though I had grown up in a Chinese family with traditional parents and brothers. I looked Asian on the outside, but much of my thinking was very Americanized. In my desperation, I wasn't able to find a book that could get answers on Chinese culture like I could with many other subjects I studied in seminary. In my attempt to be teachable, I asked people to explain how things were done or why things were the way they were. But those I approached were unable to use words to explain Chinese culture to me. I remembered my interactions with an older Chinese man who had shown me kindness by taking time to listen to my struggling to understand Chinese culture. He didn't respond with a lot of explanation because that's a rather direct form of communication. Instead, he encouraged me to read a book titled Animal Farm by George Orwell. When we discussed the book after I read it, he implied how the allegorical stories in the book has similarities to some of the people dynamics I was experiencing. I had learned from a master at indirect communication. Through that interaction and many others since, I've come to realize that culture is not something to be explained. Culture is something that has to be experienced. Culture is more than language, behavior, beliefs, and values. This helpful diagram, known as the cultural iceberg, illustrates a small number of cultural elements above the water and a large number of cultural elements under the water. Above the water are surface culture elements like food, music, language, and literature. These are easier to understand because they're seen and heard. Below the water are deep culture elements like communication styles, body language, and etiquette, which in Asian cultures are particularly nuanced and harder to grasp without being experienced. Bicultural benefits. During their formative teenage years, Asian Americans often wrestle with their sense of identity, struggling to belong with their Asian community, or being fully accepted as an all-American person. It's fairly common for next-generation Asian Americans to experience feelings of being second class or not fitting in. On the other hand, shamed for not speaking the Asian language well. On the other hand, Asian Americans are stereotyped by racial insensitivities or mistaken for a different Asian ethnicity, being ignorantly asked the subsequent question, "Where are you really from?" I've been there myself, so I can sincerely say that I've felt that pain. However, rather than being limited by these challenges and struggles, I believe that being Asian American is more than, not less than. While some Asian Americans might not fully identify with Asians or Americans, we can draw from both bicultural backgrounds to bring out the best from both cultures and to better navigate in a multicultural world to make our unique contribution. This is not an easy thing to achieve, as it has taken me years to come to this realization myself. Instead of fighting the cultures as if they were constraining, embrace the opportunity to develop cross-cultural competencies. Because culture is more caught than taught, we have the lived experience of being immersed in two very different cultures, Asian and American. And we are a huge asset in a multi-ethnic and multicultural context of America and the global village of the world as well. We were born into an immigrant Asian family context which instills Asian cultural values, at the same time conversant in American values through school, work, and relationship with peers. And that's what is uniquely special about multi-Asian churches. They are a particular kind of multi-ethnic churches that have the valuable contribution of Asian Americans. First, let's go back to the Bible to discover God's heart for what He wants in His church. Biblical mandate for multi-ethnic churches. Why do we need multi-ethnic churches when diversity is so hard to achieve? The reason is not to be more politically correct or to address our society's need for racial reconciliation. The reasons for multi-ethnic churches are clearly biblical, theological, and practical. Everything we do as Christ followers and churches must be grounded in what the Bible teaches. Pastor Mark DeMaz, who pastors Mosaic Church of Central Arkansas, has authored 2 books on this subject, Building a Healthy Multi-Ethnic Church, Mandate, Commitments, and Practices of a Diverse Congregation, and Leading a Healthy Multi-Ethnic Church, 7 Common Challenges and How to Overcome Them. The second book is co-authored with Harry Lee, an Asian American pastor who ministers together with Pastor DeMaz. In a Leadership Journal interview, Pastor DeMaz summarized the biblical mandate for a multi-ethnic church. Christ envisions the multi-ethnic church on the nights before He dies, John 17:20-23, so that the world will know God's love and believe. Luke describes the model at Antioch in Acts 11 and 13. The first mega, missional, and multi-ethnic community of faith and the most influential church in the New Testament. Paul describes unity and diversity for the local church in his letter to the Ephesians, where his theme is the unity of the church for the sake of the gospel. The Bible can speak for itself. Here's 3 of the key passages. John 17:20-23. I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. Ephesians 3, 1-10. For this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner for Christ Jesus on behalf of you Gentiles, assuming that you have heard of the stewardship of God's grace that was given to me for you, how the mystery was made known to me by revelation, as I have written briefly. When you read this, you can perceive my insight into the mystery of Christ, which was not made known to the sons of men in other generations, as it has now been revealed to his holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit. This mystery is that the Gentiles are fellow heirs, members of the same body, and partakers of the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. Of this gospel I was made a minister according to the gift of God's grace, which was given me by the working of his power. To me, though I am the very least of all the saints, this grace was given to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, and to bring to light for everyone what is the plan of the mystery hidden for ages in God, who created all things, so that through the church the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. Revelation 7, 9-10. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." The Ephesians 3 passage clearly explains that the mystery of the gospel is revealed to us, that the gospel is for everyone, both Jews and Gentiles, both Asians and Americans, in fact, for every nation, every tribe, every people group, and every language. The good news brings everyone riches, promise, hope, and peace. And this is the power of the gospel on full display for the world to see. The multi-ethnic church is the best showcase of people coming together across racial, ethnic, class, socioeconomic, and generational differences. And when people worship together, because they've been reconciled to God and to one another, the world will know God's love and believe in him. This is what Jesus prayed for in John 17. The best showcase of human diversity is not the Olympics or the United Nations. The best showcase of human diversity unified as one is the local church, where people are worshiping together and living peacefully with one another for now and forever. If the multi-ethnic church is the biblical mandate, then why are there so many Bible-teaching churches not multi-ethnic and racially diverse? According to this quote attributed to Martin Luther King Jr., 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. Indeed, years after the civil rights movement of the 1960s, the American church is still largely segregated. Sociologists define a church as being multi-ethnic when the congregation has at least 20% diversity. The 2012 National Congregations Study results show that 20% attend churches where no single racial or ethnic group makes up at least 80% of the congregation. To be fair, legitimately, a local church could be monocultural because the demographics of its locality is not diverse, or due to language limitations of an ethnic church for immigrants. But in an increasingly diverse America, that is a shrinking reality in almost every state in the United States. Dozens of books and research have been published about multi-ethnic churches explaining the many complicated reasons why there are so few of them. These reasons include the systemic racial problems, social injustices, homogeneous church growth pragmatics, and cultural blind spots. There are also simple reasons why there's only a few true diverse multi-ethnic churches. It's natural for people to only want to be around people like themselves. And it's normal for people to stay away from anything uncomfortable. I know I like wearing t-shirts that are only 100% cotton. As I'm writing this chapter, I just finished a phone conversation with a Caucasian pastor in the Dallas-Fort Worth area describing his experience with leading his church to diversify. The church went from primarily being Caucasian to having 30% minority during the past couple of years. It was not an easy process. It was met with resistance. Even though the church is very active in cross-cultural missions overseas, church members said they were uncomfortable with the increasing diversity in their church. Their resistance was not due to the variety of races, but because of different cultures. What's disruptive is not that people looked different from one another, but rather it's how people talked, ate, behaved, and worshipped differently. The gospel, the heart of God, calls every church to be a supernatural witness for all peoples, not limiting itself to one locality or one language. Every church is to be a supernatural work of God, which starts in one place and progressively takes steps toward fulfilling the God-given mission to spread the gospel to the ends of the earth. Within the limited scope of this book, I will address two topics related to how the local church can be fulfilling the gospel mandate more completely: contextualization and multi-Asian churches. Importance of contextualization. Have you noticed that the Bible has not just one, but 4 gospels about Jesus Christ? Why wasn't one gospel enough for everyone? Matthew was written for the Jews. Mark was written for the Romans. Luke wrote to the Greeks, and John was writing with the Gentiles in mind. In a similar fashion, different expressions of local churches are strategic for reaching different demographics. Because the Bible has 4 Gospels of Jesus Christ, we get 4 different perspectives of the same true story, which makes the story richer and more meaningful. No one would say that we only need one of the Gospels. We need the entire Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, because they are both valuable to our entire life. As it is written in 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, all Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. Pastor Tim Keller eloquently explained the importance of contextualization in his book, Preaching, Communicating Faith in an Age of Skepticism. The moment you open your mouth, many things, your cadence, accent, vocabulary, illustrations, and ways of reasoning, and the way you express emotions make you culturally more accessible to some people and force others to stretch and work harder to understand or even pay attention to you. No one can present a culture-free formulation of biblical truth. Pastor Tim Keller has also become an active Twitter user in recent years, and this is a short curated list of tweets that further expounds his view on the necessity of contextualization. Everybody contextualizes, but few think much about how they are doing it. When you open your mouth and speak in English, you are making the gospel hearable to some and not others. That's contextualization. Contextualization is giving people the answers the gospel gives to the questions they have. Sound contextualization shows people how the plot lines of the stories of their lives can only find a happy ending in Christ. One of the biggest barriers to effective contextualization is the invisibility of our own cultural assumptions. We adapt and contextualize in order to speak the truth in love, to both care and to confront. To reach people, we must appreciate and adapt to their culture, but we also challenge and confront it. For a more thorough treatment of contextualization, I highly recommend Tim Keller's book, Center Church, Doing Balanced, Gospel-Centered Ministry in Your City, in which he devotes 4 chapters to contextualization. Chapter 10 on active contextualization is available as a free PDF download at timothykeller.com/books/center-church. So it is in this multicultural, diverse world in which the church must contextualize its gospel expression as a community of faith. Furthermore, to be faithful in a multicultural society, we must become more aware of our own cultural lenses and biases in order to know how we influence and impact others, both those who are familiar and those who are not. How can you and your church better contextualize for the world today? In one sense, you and your church already contextualizes based on your life experiences and culture. That's where we all start. Yet, the gospel calls all of us to participate in the work of God to the ends of the earth. In multicultural America, that is easy for us to do because people from all around the world are coming here. Asian Americans already know that innately because the immigrant story is right here in our immediate family history. Current events have also raised our awareness of immigration from many other nationalities and racial ethnic groups. To reach people from around the world in many American cities and suburbs, we simply need to go across the street or to the neighborhood across town. This is why you and I must do the work of contextualization so that we can grow our capacity to share the gospel beyond our own cultural comfort zone. And to do that, there's no easy way, no recipe or online course. It is plain hard work to learn something totally different. Here are a few tips on learning contextualization. Have the attitude of a student and a learner. Get a guide or translator when going to a new people group nearby or across town. If you don't have one, befriend someone over meals. Sharing a meal together has so much more meaning during Old Testament times. It is an integral part of crossing cultures. With a sincere and respectful curiosity, ask good questions and be a great listener. People of all cultures have a born instinct to sense your sincerity. At the top of this chapter, I mentioned how culture is something you have to experience. As your friendship grows, you'll earn trust, take more risks, and make mistakes as you learn how to communicate better cross-culturally. Contextualization is not just the message of the gospel and the words we use to communicate. Contextualization also affects our theology and our ecclesiology. Recent scholarship is surfacing on the subject of global theology. It is beginning to reveal how much our theology and ecclesiology have been solely shaped by European cultures and Western civilization. Some of this may be attributed to the sovereignty of God and how the gospel has spread during the past 20 centuries. But as the center of Christianity is shifting to the south and to the east, we are beginning to discover new perspectives from the South American, African, and Asian Christian leaders. This is where I believe the multi-ethnic churches have the potential to more fully express the gospel in a multicultural way. The multi-ethnic church can be the best context for people to grow together in a community of trusted relationships in order to caringly challenge cultural blind spots and experientially learn one another's cultures. Discussions of faith and race can often feel rather awkward and uncomfortable because most of us don't have practice in navigating multiple cultures or respectful conversations cross-culturally. Multi-ethnic churches can be the answer, a safe place to appreciate the differences and work out the contextualization of the gospel for their community while participating in the mission of God for the world. Why multi-Asian churches? American history has been racialized through its government policies that supported slavery, discrimination, prejudice, and other injustices. Even in the history of American churches, there was the formation of denominations along racial lines. For example, the Baptists split into two denominations in 1845 over slavery. The North became the American Baptists. The South became the Southern Baptists. Over time, the Southern Baptist Convention has become and remains the largest Protestant denomination in America today. Yet, it wasn't until 1995 that Southern Baptist officials formally renounced the church's support of slavery and segregation. Thus, in this American context, a majority portion of the development of multi-ethnic churches has involved the racial reconciliation between white and black, Caucasian, and African Americans. We've made some progress, but we still have a long way to go. With this new phenomena I call multi-Asian churches, I believe this gives the American church another way to bring hope and healing to many. Multi-Asian churches are a different kind of multi-ethnic church. It is led by a next-generation Asian American pastor. The bicultural experiences of an Asian American can be leveraged as a head start for acquiring new skills in crossing cultures and for facilitating cross-cultural dialogue. Perhaps due to the fact that Asian Americans have a different narrative in our part of the American history, we have something different to contribute. We don't have a long history of racial tension such as the one between white and black that's lasted generations and resurfaced in recent violence in cities like Ferguson, Baltimore, and Dallas, with no end in sight. These racial tensions and systemic inequalities between black and white could have resulted in everything being stuck. Maybe we can try a different approach, to do an end run around this stalemate and possibly discover a new way forward. Asian Americans have the experience of mediating reconciliation indirectly and relationally by coming alongside of contentious parties. This is a contrast to having everyone directly air their grievances out loud and then asking for forgiveness. It's parallel to the difference between acupuncture and invasive surgery. Having a mediator facilitate reconciliation in broken relationships is commonly practiced in the biblical culture of the Old and New Testament as well. So in the context of racial tension in American history, then perhaps a table that's hosted by an Asian American could facilitate healthier progress in ways we've yet to experience. Multi-Asian churches are also best contextualized to reach next-generation Asian Americans. Some next-generation Asian Americans have a difficult time feeling at home in an ethnic Asian church or the mainstream American church. Both of those tend to be too homogeneous. A multi-Asian church can be a more inviting place for next-generation Asian Americans and non-Asians alike because its ethos of bicultural elasticity can accommodate more diversity. When I've experienced a healthy multi-Asian church, I describe it as entering a church community, not having to explain myself so much because I'm with people who have shared experience and empathy, for my bicultural background. Let me share an example of a multi-Asian church that's developed a multi-ethnic church family. In 2012, Pastor Drew Hyun gathered weekly with a group of people, eating and praying and dreaming about starting a family of churches in New York City. Hope City NYC launched first in Astoria, and now, 4 years later, Hope Church NYC has a family of churches in 5 diverse neighborhoods across New York City: Roosevelt Island, Midtown Manhattan, Long Island, Bayside in Queens, and Brooklyn. Each of these churches are called Hope Church and share the same vision and core values to lead people into a transforming relationship with Jesus and a community of faith. Yet, each church is autonomous and independently governed, so they are fully empowered to lead and serve their own communities as they discern best. In a place like New York City, planting neighborhood churches right where people live allows the transforming power of community to continually seep into their lives every day rather than once a week on Sundays. Pastor Drew Hyun, a next-generation Korean American, has intentionally directed the Hope Church family to empower minorities in planting diverse churches. The pastors of the other Hope churches include a New York native, second-generation Puerto Rican, a Korean American, an Indian American, an African American, and 2 Caucasians. In May of 2016, Pastor Drew was part of launching an urban church planting network called the New City Network that hosted its first conference, the New City Gathering. This gathering consisted of 170 diverse church planters and practitioners from around the country, and among other topics, the heart of launching diverse church communities was emphasized and discussed at length. All kinds of churches for all kinds of people. It takes all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people, said Pastor Rick Warren. In this cultural climate of America that's becoming more and more antagonistic to Christianity, I'm not inclined to waste my resources on discernment ministries and their watchdog blogs or developing the best argument for the right theology, methodology, or model of ministry. I would encourage church leaders to be thoroughly convinced from the scriptures on how to do ministry and how to organize their biblical understanding into a coherent theology. Churches need to have firm convictions, but we don't need to be wasting time being contentious with one another. Let me address a couple of common issues that have surfaced in my conversations with pastors and church leaders. Some pastors say, we just need churches that preach the gospel and leave the results up to God. Yes, absolutely, we need gospel preaching churches. And we need to realize that everything speaks. What and how we preach, the communication style and language used, how we choose and sing worship songs, the way we relate, the decor of the worship center, and so much more. There's a lot going on in a church than merely its statement of beliefs or doctrines. Some church leaders like to quote, "The message never changes, but methods can change." My encouragement here is to be thoughtful and strategic on how your church does its ministry in order to evaluate your ministry effectiveness. And when something is not effective, be willing to change. We want churches that are both faithful and fruitful. What about ethnic Asian churches? Yes, there's an obvious need for the ethnic Asian church to reach and minister to first-generation immigrants from Asia in the language that they can understand. There's also the call for all churches to participate in God's work to reach all peoples. If not for the missionaries sent across the seas to share the gospel in Asia, there wouldn't be Asian Christians. There are still unengaged, unreached people groups around the world with no Bible, no churches, and no Christians, and ethnic Asian churches can make a unique contribution in sharing the gospel there. Many pastors in ethnic Asian churches face the challenges of ministering to the next generation English-speaking Asian Americans. The question I hear most often is, how do we keep our children in church? It's natural to want their children to keep the faith by belonging to the same church that would have a familiar family-oriented Asian culture. And God is able to do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine according to his power that is work in us. Ephesians 3:20. May I suggest a different perspective that would be more helpful? Consider these more gospel-oriented questions to look beyond the challenges and see the opportunities. How can our church be a place where our children can bring their friends? What does God want to do in our city? Or who does God want us to reach beyond those of our own ethnicity? I think if churches become the answer to these questions, they will get to keep their children and receive so much more. When we join in God's adventure of living by faith, churches will not be irrelevant or boring. In the next chapter, I will introduce stories of multi-generational churches and how they're reaching next generation Asian Americans and beyond.